I love this module. This is so much fun to teach. It's so much fun to engage with students with and like see what they have to say like in the classroom or online. So much fun stuff to talk about and like some really, really important issues involving killing versus letting die. But before we get into it, we kind of have to spend some time figuring out exactly what the question is that we're trying to answer. So that's what we're going to do in this video. Okay, so let's start with a claim. I've just called it K. And K is just the claim that killing is worse than letting die. And there are lots of different ways we might try to interpret this claim. And then we can ask like, well, okay, is it true? And I bet you've been around this course long enough to where you see something like this and you're pretty suspicious, and you should be. We can probably come up with some counterexamples to this claim. And I've got two different interpretations of what this could mean, a really strong one. If you want to learn how to do stuff like this, you can take my Philosophy 321 course, just called Symbolic Logic, and I'll teach you how to symbolize. But all this means is for any x, right? So for any like act or whatever x, if x is an act of killing, then for any y, if y is an act of letting die, then x is worse than y. In other words, like pick an act of killing, pick an act of letting die, the killing is always going to be worse than the letting die. That's what this version says. Now, this is a really strong claim. I bet you can come up with a counterexample to it. Pause the video, see if you can. Here's mine. Here's my case of killing. A soldier just kills an enemy soldier of war. Boom. My case of letting die is an ER doctor who like has a stabbing victim and she just like refuses to do anything and she just lets him die. To me, this seems like way, way worse than this. And so, yeah, we've got a case of letting die that seems worse than killing. Now, what this shows is that this really strong version is false. You probably had a counterexample. A lot of my students will come up with counterexamples to this weaker version, which is good, right? Because a weaker claim is easier to defend. A weaker claim is harder to come up with a counterexample to. So you probably came up with a counterexample to this one, which is even harder to do. The only difference is I want the killing and the letting die to be like kind of relevant to one another, whatever that means. And so the case, well, I didn't come up with the case. I stole it from Judith Thompson. We've got like two uncles, both of whom want their nephews dead. And so Bob, just like shoves his nephew into the pool and, drowns him. Albert is like going down to do that, right? He's like walking down to the pool to shove his nephew in. But when he gets there, he sees that the nephew is like already drowning in the pool. He could easily like go in and save him, but he just doesn't. He just lets him die. These both seem, I think, like pretty equally heinous. And so again, we've got a case where killing is not worse than letting die. But that's not really what we're after in this module. Like, that's not super surprising, especially if you've been doing philosophy for a little bit. Here's what's kind of interesting. These labels, killing and letting die, to call something an act of killing, to call something an act of letting die, they don't seem to be doing any like philosophical work for us. That's weird. That's the weird thing. So, and kind of like a really surprising result, it's like, I mean, we could even maybe like, a case of euthanasia, where, you end someone's life who is, terminally ill. We could even maybe argue that that's a case of killing that is like morally praiseworthy, morally permissible, morally even obligatory. And so this is kind of a surprising result that we're not able to even like do a comparison here between killing and letting die. So it's like, okay, if these are moral predicates, right? Like, like a predicate is like, this is yellow, that's a color predicate. This is tall, that's a height predicate. These are moral predicates. if they are, they're not really telling us anything about the moral status of the act, and that's what's surprising. So, like, what is going on in these cases? It can't be that, oh, well, this is killing and this is letting die. So what is it? Some possible solutions here. Maybe there's some kind of intent to harm. But, like, it's not clear to me. I mean, it's not obvious that, like, letting somebody die does not involve intending to harm them. Like, or at the very least, like, I am ignoring an intent to intervene. And so, you know, intent here doesn't seem to be doing a lot of heavy lifting. It seems to be, like, somewhat relevant. Same with active versus passive, right? Like, this seems to be an important distinction, although I will say, like, with our two uncles case, you know, one was active, one was passive, but they both seemed equally heinous. And in the letting die with the ER doctor case, the passive one seemed to be worse than the active one. And it's not really true. I guess it kind of depends on your theory of action here, but, like, if I have decided to just, like, stand here and, like, not help my patient, it still seems like I'm actively doing something. Right now, I'm not, like, actively, like, acting upon my patient. I'm not, like, doing the harming. But it's not as if, like, I'm just doing nothing. I am choosing to stand here and not intervene. But, you know, reasonable minds can disagree about that kind of thing. So these aren't really, like, what seem to be doing the work. Maybe they're explaining some of the intuitions, but it's not quite what we need here. So again, this is the question that we're trying to answer. What are the morally relevant features of these actions? When a soldier kills an enemy soldier, what's, like, okay about that versus, you know, me just, like, killing somebody on the street? If it's the same bullet and the same gun and the same intent to kill, like, you know, what's going on here? So this is the kind of question that we're trying to unpack. This is the sort of thing that we'll be talking about. In the next video, we're going to talk about the doctrine of double effect, a very, very important principle within ethics and dealing with this kind of question. I'll see you then.